Welcome, my cherished chosen ones. Let the full weight of it crash down upon them. Every lingering tendril of doubt they harbored, each hushed judgment they passed in the shadows, every calculated assessment they secretly made, let them feel the sting of it now. This is the moment that so many of them swore would never arrive. You weren't exaggerating some fanciful tale. You weren't simply playing a role, adopting a persona. Every bold claim you staked about your unique path, every unwavering declaration of who you were at your core, every silent moment you endured their laughter, their mocking dismissals, all of it was truth patiently unfolding, truth veiled in the quiet strength of endurance. The stark, unvarnished reality is this. Those who dare to underestimate the divinely appointed rarely recover with any semblance of grace. Recent studies examining the chasm between perception and reality reveal a fascinating, yet painful truth. When individuals are confronted with undeniable evidence that shatters their most deeply held assumptions, the resulting humiliation can trigger a profound psychological stress, often likened to a minor trauma. In layman's terms, those who doubted you, who scoffed and sneered, are now paying the heavy emotional price for their error in judgment, and you haven't even had to lift a finger in retaliation. Herein lies the exquisite brilliance of it all. While they were busy grappling with their flawed assumptions, consumed by silent envy, or plotting to undermine you behind the veil of secrecy, you were diligently, quietly constructing a foundation they couldn't even begin to fathom. They chuckled at your audacious claims, failing to grasp that your words weren't hollow pronouncements intended to impress them. No, they were unwavering declarations that would ultimately render them speechless, awestruck in disbelief. You became a walking enigma in their eyes, familiar, yet utterly unknowable, visible yet tantalizingly untouchable. Someone they mistakenly believed they could easily decipher, yet someone whose very essence remained incomprehensible to them. And now, as your reality blossoms into existence precisely as you foretold, every smug smirk they wore, every condescending eye roll they delivered, every haughty judgment they cast is slowly, agonizingly curdling into a potent cocktail of pure, undeniable humiliation. It's almost a poetic justice. Really, to witness those who so eagerly attempted to write your story suddenly discover they weren't even granted a seat in the author's chair. They fancied themselves as astute critics, wielding their pens with authority, when in truth they were merely spectators, forced to witness a truth they stubbornly refused to acknowledge. And there's a touch of humor to be found in it, too. Picture their faces, hear their internal groans. Imagine the frantic mental notes they're scribbling as they grapple with the realization that the seemingly insignificant claim you made years ago has now become the undeniable, bold-faced headline of your life. But let us not forget, this isn't solely about them and their comeuppance. It's a profound testament to the unwavering power of consistency, the subtle mastery of embodying exactly who you claim to be, and the serene joy that blossoms from knowing that truth, patience, and unwavering vision never require validation from those who chose to doubt it. The irony hangs thick in the air, the suspense is unrelenting, and the satisfaction is deliciously unavoidable. They are finally forced to acknowledge that your confidence wasn't mere arrogance. It was an accurate self-assessment. For years, they scrutinized your self-assurance as if it were a glaring flaw, labeling it as arrogance or an inflated ego. They failed to comprehend that what they perceived as boldness was, in reality, a quiet, unshakable knowledge of your own inherent worth and your unique abilities. Every time you spoke, moved, or acted with unwavering certainty, they felt subtly challenged, and not because you were intentionally threatening them, but because their own deep-seated insecurities couldn't process someone operating from a place of unwavering clarity rather than a desperate need for external validation. They mistakenly equated self-awareness with self-importance. And in doing so, they constructed an entire narrative about you that was fundamentally untrue. Now, as reality has finally caught up with them, the truth hits them with the force of a shockwave. Your confidence wasn't a fabricated facade designed to impress anyone or to put them in their place. It was deeply rooted in a precise self-measurement, an accurate recognition of your skills, your limitations, and the grand design of your destiny. As they see you standing tall where you always declared you would, achieving what you always boldly claimed you could, it humiliates them to their core because they were fundamentally wrong about you in the most profound way. They squandered their time projecting their own doubts onto you, mistakenly believing they were accurately reading your character, when in reality, the reflection they were seeing was nothing more than their own gnawing fear. What makes this realization even more excruciating for them is the undeniable fact that they can't argue with the tangible reality unfolding before their eyes. They can't rewrite history or diminish your hard-won achievements. Every quiet step you took while they mocked and scorned, every meticulously executed plan you pursued with unwavering discipline while they indulged in laughter, every boundary you firmly set while they mistakenly assumed it was a sign of weakness, now stands as undeniable evidence of their profound misjudgment. They are beginning to grasp the crucial fact that your confidence never craved their validation because it was never truly about them in the first place. Their humiliation is a stark reflection of their own failures. The inability to accurately measure themselves, the failure to recognize genuine strength when it stood directly before them. Meanwhile, you've been operating on a plane of self-awareness that remains tantalizingly out of their reach. And their profound discomfort isn't a result of your supposed arrogance. It stems from the uncomfortable truth that they fundamentally misjudged someone who was never pretending to be anything other than their authentic self. Their embarrassment is inevitable, and the soul deep satisfaction of knowing it is entirely natural. You were right all along, and they are finally forced to acknowledge it, not with enthusiastic applause, but with the silent, bitter recognition that their assumptions weren't just slightly incorrect. They were humiliatingly far removed from the actual truth. Their gravest error was assuming that your deliberate pace indicated pretense. They observed you moving at your own rhythm and misinterpreted it as hesitation, uncertainty, or even outright fabrication. They falsely assumed that because you weren't frantically rushing to prove yourself to them, you must be pretending to be someone you weren't. They judged every thoughtful pause, every moment of quiet contemplation as a sign of weakness or indecision. And in doing so, they woefully underestimated the formidable power of your impeccable timing. They failed to grasp that certain individuals operate according to a clock that remains unreadable to the masses. Each perceived delay, every period of careful observation, every silent strategic move was a deliberate layering of preparation that remained invisible to their myopic gaze. Now, the irony is almost unbearable for them to stomach. The delay they so eagerly mocked was never a pause. It was meticulous preparation. While they were consumed by their impulsive actions, their nagging doubts, and their hasty judgments, you were quietly building, learning, testing, and fortifying every facet of yourself that needed to be unshakable. Your patience wasn't born of passivity. It was a deliberate calibration, allowing you to act when the opportune moment arrived with a precision and impact they couldn't possibly anticipate. They feel utterly humiliated because they mistakenly equated stillness with falseness, and the undeniable results now confront them with the stark truth of their error. Their embarrassment is further compounded by the fact that they were utterly convinced they were ahead of the game, that they possessed a distinct advantage because they acted first, spoke first, or desperately tried to seize influence before you did. Every arrogant assumption they made about your perceived delay now feels utterly foolish in the face of your undeniable success. The reality is they mistook your quietude for emptiness, failing to realize that the most profound power often resides within the quietest moments. They see now that while they were preoccupied with casting judgments and plotting their petty interferences, you were steadily constructing a life, a reputation, and a commanding presence that couldn't be shaken by their skepticism or ridiculed by their scorn. The most agonizing part for them is recognizing that their frantic timing and their crippling impatience never granted them any real advantage. You weren't pretending or posturing. You were precise, deliberate, and unstoppable. Their humiliation isn't about anything you did wrong. It's about the sheer magnitude of their catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed that your measured pace meant you were small, weak, or inauthentic. The truth is, your timing was always perfect, divinely orchestrated. And now, in the stark aftermath of their misjudgment, the crushing weight of that realization sits heavily upon them, while you stand as living evidence that patience, unwavering clarity, and profound self-awareness will always triumph over their shallow, fleeting assumptions. They laughed derisively when you boldly declared your destiny, failing to realize that you were simultaneously declaring their future apology. They heard you speak with unwavering conviction about your ambitious goals, your unique path, and your expansive vision, and they scoffed. They whispered behind your back, assuming you were exaggerating your capabilities, and treated your heartfelt declarations as mere entertainment rather than profound truth. They couldn't fathom that what you were doing wasn't simply talking about yourself. You were subtly setting the stage for a reality they would one day be forced to confront. Every dismissive word they uttered was a seed of undeniable proof being planted, and every shared laugh was a contract they unknowingly signed, committing themselves to eventually admit they were wrong. The humiliation they now feel doesn't stem solely from your remarkable success. It arises from the biting irony of it all. They mocked your impassioned claims without realizing that the extraordinary life you described wasn't just a personal aspiration. It was a carefully crafted roadmap that would eventually compel them to recognize the truth they had stubbornly ignored. They never imagined that the person they assumed was overreaching or hopelessly naive would actually evolve into the very individual they once doubted. And what's even worse for them, your resounding success didn't just validate you. It invalidated their disbelief, exposing their inherent judgment, their simmering envy, and their profound short-sightedness. They feel utterly embarrassed because they now understand that the apologies they might eventually offer aren't really about you at all. They're about themselves, about the times they laughed, doubted, and woefully underestimated you. Your destiny wasn't a challenge hurled at them. It was a mirror reflecting just how poorly they handled someone operating from a place of unwavering integrity and expansive vision. They arrogantly assumed they were in control of the narrative, but it turns out that their role was far smaller than they ever imagined. Their criticism irrelevant, their laughter utterly meaningless. The profound satisfaction for you arises from watching this unfold organically. You didn't need to respond defensively, prove your worth, or retaliate in kind. You simply moved forward with unwavering resolve, built your empire quietly, and allowed life itself to serve as the undeniable evidence of your powerful words. They will now be forced to confront a truth that can no longer be ignored. What they once ridiculed is now undeniably, resoundingly real, and their eventual recognition, whether they openly admit it or desperately try to conceal it, will carry the bitter weight of knowing they were wrong. Your declarations weren't intended for them, but the impact of their decision to ignore them will serve as a potent lesson they will not soon forget. They foolishly believed they could outgrow you, only to be confronted with the devastating realization that you were the standard they could never attain. They were utterly convinced that stepping away from your influence would automatically elevate them above you. They treated distance like a ladder, naively believing that all they had to do was climb far enough away from your presence to claim their perceived superiority. They acted as if mere proximity to you was the only thing preventing them from achieving greatness. But here's where the harsh truth blindsided them. They didn't ascend to new heights by walking away. They simply removed themselves from the very environment that was subtly elevating them. Your presence wasn't competition. It was calibration. Being in your sphere forced them to confront their weaknesses, sharpen their character, and elevate their work ethic. Without you serving as a silent reference point, their growth stalled and stagnated. They thought removing you from the picture meant removing accountability, only to discover it removed their direction. They futilely tried to outperform someone who had never been in a race with them. They weren't genuinely trying to surpass your achievements. They were desperately trying to outrun the gnawing discomfort of knowing you possessed something they couldn't fake: authenticity, depth, and an unshakable inner truth. As you continued your steady evolution, they faced the shocking realization that the distance they so carefully created did nothing but highlight just how stagnant they truly were. Every passing year, every significant milestone, every elevation you gracefully stepped into made their initial decision look increasingly foolish. They euphemistically call it outgrowing you, but what they were really doing was shrinking away from their own inadequacies. Their inflated pride deluded them into believing they were expanding, when in reality your remarkable growth merely exposed the fact that they were only stretching the illusion, not cultivating genuine substance. Now, the chilling weight of humiliation settles in. The person they once tried to downplay has become someone they secretly study, dissecting every move. The one they arrogantly assumed they could effortlessly surpass is now standing on a level they cannot touch, no matter how desperately they mimic, compete, or pretend. And the sting is even more profound because you never chased them, compared yourself to them, or tried to keep them close. You simply lived, grew, and aligned yourself with the person you were always meant to be. Their acute embarrassment stems from realizing that they didn't outgrow you. They outgrew their ability to conceal the envy they desperately hoped you'd never notice. And now, the very guidance they once dismissively rejected from you has become the direction they so desperately crave, but are too ashamed to request. Their humiliation stems from the crushing understanding that they didn't merely misjudge you. They profoundly misjudged themselves. The crushing reality for them isn't that they simply got you wrong. It's that they got themselves wrong in the most fundamental way. For years, they walked around with an inflated sense of their own abilities, naively believing they were smarter, faster, stronger, or more inherently capable than everyone in their path. You weren't even a factor in their arrogant self-assessment. They simply assumed their own measures of success and influence were untouchable. Watching you confidently step into your power shatters that carefully constructed illusion. Every assured move you make, every significant milestone you reach, and every calm assurance you exude forces them to confront a truth they weren't prepared to face. The idealized version of themselves they clung to so tightly is nothing more than an elaborate figment of their imagination. They see now that they weren't accurately measuring you. They were merely measuring their own fragile ego against an imagined standard of perfection. Their profound misjudgment wasn't about underestimating you. It was about drastically overestimating themselves. And that realization is brutally painful because it comes with no convenient excuses, no easy shortcuts, and no room for denial. The person they arrogantly assumed they could quietly surpass or effortlessly control has become a mirror, reflecting all the gaping holes they stubbornly refuse to acknowledge. Their humiliation isn't rooted solely in envy. It's deeply rooted in the recognition that they were never as untouchable as they so desperately believed. What intensifies their embarrassment is the fact that it's not just a one-time shock. Every time they witness your sustained growth, your unwavering consistency, or your calm authority, they are relentlessly reminded of the painful truth they've been diligently avoiding. They can no longer rely on their old self-serving narratives to protect their fragile ego. Their inflated confidence in themselves erodes with each passing day because it was never grounded in genuine truth. It was grounded in a deep-seated fear of being less than what they projected. And the sting of it all is subtle but relentless. They realized they weren't superior, they weren't in control, and their judgment was deeply flawed from the very beginning. They weren't wrong about you. They were profoundly wrong about their own place in the grand tapestry of the world. That's the agonizing part that quietly and completely breaks them down. The truth that they underestimated your potential while simultaneously overestimating their own. And that devastating miscalculation leaves a mark far deeper and more lasting than any heated confrontation ever could. They're mortified because you didn't become who you said you'd be. You were already that extraordinary person, simply waiting to be unveiled. The humiliation they feel isn't because you suddenly achieved something new. It's because they are finally able to see what was always there, shimmering just beneath the surface. They mistakenly assumed your bold claims, your quiet confidence, and your expansive vision were merely aspirational, that you were talking about a person you were actively striving to become. They failed to grasp that your inherent greatness didn't require a specific timeline, external approval, or validation from others. It already existed, fully formed, within the very core of your being. All you've gracefully done is lift the veil, reveal the intricate layers, and move with a newfound clarity that they were incapable of perceiving before. They're deeply embarrassed because their own narrow vision of reality was so inherently limited. They expected growth to manifest as struggle, chaos, or visible effort. They naively assumed that transformation was a linear process, loud and dramatic. What they weren't prepared for was someone quietly powerful, someone whose evolution doesn't shout for attention but simply exists, undeniable in its profound presence. Your unveiling wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about living authentically, embodying your truest self in a way they couldn't process or comprehend. Their perception was never adequately equipped to fully see what you were capable of achieving. Their humiliation stems from the painful realization of their own intellectual and spiritual limits. Every confident step you take now confirms what they arrogantly assumed was utterly impossible. They mistakenly believed that if your life were to truly align with your words, it would require a significant amount of time, visible struggle, or Herculean effort. Instead, your life effortlessly aligns with what you always claimed because your alignment wasn't a far-off goal. It was an inherent truth. They feel utterly foolish, not because you underwent some dramatic transformation, but because their judgment was based on their own inability to see the depth, unwavering discipline, and quiet consistency that existed within you all along. What hurts them most deeply is that they arrogantly thought they could time you, pace you, or accurately measure your progress. And now they see that none of that holds any significance. You didn't gradually grow into yourself. You were always that person, simply waiting for the right moment to emerge. Your presence, your choices, and your remarkable results aren't a performance. They're a profound revelation. And the embarrassment they feel is the quiet, bitter recognition that for all their meticulous observation, all their relentless criticism, and all their deeply flawed assumptions, they were simply not equipped to recognize the profound truth they now cannot deny. What humiliates them most deeply is realizing that you never competed with them. They were competing with their own distorted projection of you. The real sting for them isn't that you succeeded against all odds. It's that they were frantically racing against a version of you that never actually existed. All along, they mistakenly assumed you were engaged in some invisible competition with them, that every confident step you took was a deliberate challenge to their authority, that every significant achievement was meant to somehow prove them wrong. What they utterly failed to recognize is that you were never concerned with their position, their pace, or their approval. Their imagined competition was entirely self-created, born from their own insecurities, seething jealousy, and a constant, desperate need to measure themselves against someone they fundamentally misunderstood. They constructed elaborate imaginary races in their minds, setting arbitrary benchmarks based on their flawed perception of your potential rather than your actual reality. They arrogantly assumed your life, your words, and your actions were all about them, as if every conscious choice you made was intended to either intimidate or impress them. Meanwhile, you were doing none of that. You weren't racing anyone. You were building your own empire quietly, healing wounds they didn't even know existed, learning invaluable lessons they wouldn't have the strength to survive, and evolving in ways that didn't require their acknowledgement or validation. Every hard-won victory of yours existed independent of their distorted perception. And that profound independence is precisely what humiliates them now. The irony is sharp and cutting. They've been sprinting, scrambling, and strategizing to win a race you didn't even enter. They exhausted themselves trying to surpass an idealized version of you, chasing fleeting shadows that were only as real as their own anxious projections. Meanwhile, your progress was deliberate, grounded, and effortless in comparison. Not because you possessed some unfair advantage, but because your precious energy wasn't squandered on imagined rivalries. Now, as they watch your magnificent reality unfold, embarrassment washes over them in waves. They realize the person they tried so desperately to outpace was never competing, never measuring, never even worried about them. They were distracted, exhausted, and utterly deceived by the self-serving story they told themselves about you. The bitter truth hits them with the force of a tsunami. Their jealousy, their constant comparisons, their frantic mental competitions, all of it was utterly meaningless. They weren't racing you. They were racing a distorted reflection of their own deep-seated insecurity. And that revelation is almost unbearable to process. Their humiliation lies not in what you actually did, but in what they arrogantly assumed. And finally, seeing the profound difference between their flawed assumptions and your genuine reality is a quiet, devastating blow they cannot possibly ignore. They finally understand that you didn't exaggerate your pain. You actually understated it. For years, they looked at your calm and composed exterior and naively assumed your challenges were minor, that the trials you faced were either exaggerated for effect or somehow easily manageable. They couldn't possibly grasp that the extraordinary strength they witnessed was forged in the fires of storms far harsher and more relentless than they could ever imagine. Your unwavering composure was mistakenly interpreted as simplicity, and your quiet confidence was misread as invulnerability. Every time they dismissively brushed aside your struggles, they woefully underestimated the magnitude of what you quietly endured. Now, the unvarnished truth carries a weight they cannot ignore. Life itself is exposing the profound depth of your arduous journey, revealing the countless battles you fought without complaint, the sacrifices you made without seeking public recognition, and the unwavering resilience you carried when every fiber of your being yearned to break. They're deeply humiliated because they arrogantly assumed that your mere survival meant your struggles were insignificant, when in reality your remarkable calmness was the irrefutable proof of something far greater. A strength that thrives in the face of adversity, not because of its absence. The painful embarrassment stems from realizing they judged you based solely on superficial appearances. They mistakenly equated patience with passivity, endurance with ease, and quiet determination with a lack of significant challenges. They naively assumed that if someone could maintain their composure under immense pressure, the pressure itself must have been minimal. They were tragically wrong. Your life has now become undeniable evidence that the most devastating storms don't always announce themselves loudly, and that surviving them with unwavering integrity is a profound power they could never accurately measure. What compounds their humiliation is the fact that they didn't just misread your pain. They arrogantly projected their own flawed assumptions onto it. They thought you were exaggerating, embellishing, or performing suffering for dramatic effect. The reality is that your pain was undeniably real, profoundly deep, and often understated precisely because you weren't seeking sympathy. You were focused on cultivating genuine growth. Their judgment, once so confident and unwavering, now feels hopelessly naive and short-sighted. They are forced to confront a humbling truth. Your calm was never a sign of weakness, and your survival was never simple or effortless. You didn't just endure the storms of life, you transcended them, and that powerful revelation leaves them speechless, deeply uncomfortable, and undeniably aware of just how little they truly understood you. Their humiliation stems from witnessing you thrive in spaces they were convinced would break you. They were utterly convinced that certain environments would swallow you whole, that the intense pressure, the inherent chaos, the overwhelming responsibility, or the crushing loneliness of those spaces would eventually destroy you. Some of them secretly waited for cracks to appear in your facade, for you to fold under the pressure the way they would have, for you to struggle and falter the way they did, for you to inadvertently prove them right by failing miserably in a space they arrogantly considered too overwhelming for someone like you. But the exact opposite occurred. Instead of breaking under the strain, you expanded your capabilities. Instead of shrinking away in fear, you adapted with remarkable grace. Instead of losing yourself in the chaos, you discovered even deeper layers of your profound purpose. Their acute humiliation stems from witnessing a truth they never wanted to admit. The environment was never the determining factor. You were. They drastically underestimated your extraordinary ability to thrive in conditions that inevitably destroy others. They arrogantly assumed the room would overpower you, failing to realize that some individuals are inherently built with a commanding presence that steadies the entire atmosphere. You didn't just survive those challenging spaces. You evolved within them, transforming intense pressure into unwavering clarity, insurmountable obstacles into valuable training, and profound isolation into unparalleled inner mastery. Every day you stood firm, unyielding in your resolve, was a direct challenge to everything they believed about you. What embarrasses them even more is that they now see how fundamentally wrong their assumptions were. They thought a difficult environment would expose your inherent weaknesses, but it ended up exposing theirs. They projected their own crippling fears and limitations onto you, foolishly believing you would drown in the deep end where they couldn't swim. Instead, you gracefully rose above the surface, not because the environment inherently favored you, but because you carry within you a remarkable capacity they never recognized. The very conditions that intimidate others became the catalyst that revealed your extraordinary strength. They can no longer deny the obvious truth. They arrogantly thought the room would define you, but now they see that the opposite is true. Your very presence is what transforms the room. Your remarkable growth forces them to confront the inherent limits of their skewed perspective and the stifling smallness of their expectations. You didn't just win despite the challenging environment. You became undeniably powerful because of it. And every confident step you take forward serves as a potent reminder that the extraordinary power they so readily doubted was real all along. And the doubt they harbored for so long says far more about them than it ever did about you. They now understand that you weren't trying to impress them. You were trying to warn them. Individuals who lack spiritual depth inevitably misinterpret profound spiritual clarity as mere arrogance. When you spoke with conviction, you weren't boasting for attention. You were broadcasting a vital message. You weren't pontificating from a place of ego. You were predicting future events. But because their ego was far louder than their discernment, they filtered your divinely inspired insight through the lens of their own gnawing insecurity and hastily labeled it as bragging. Now, the shocking truth is finally kicking in. They realize you weren't trying to prove anything to them. You were simply articulating what you keenly sensed, what you intuitively foresaw, what you were divinely assigned to communicate. Your heightened intuition was the early alarm clock they stubbornly kept hitting snooze on. Your gentle warnings were God's compassionate intervention, wrapped delicately in the sound of your voice. Your profound visions were fleeting glimpses of future events they were too spiritually asleep to recognize. And here's the twist that stings them the most deeply. Everything you so accurately said is now unfolding before their very eyes. Everything you confidently predicted is now materializing in tangible form. Everything you tried so diligently to shield them from is now standing menacingly at their doorstep. Now they're utterly embarrassed because they finally understand you weren't speaking from a place of ego or self-importance. You were speaking from a place of profound experience, from keen discernment, from a direct connection to the divine. They arrogantly accused you of overthinking, when in reality you were overseeing the bigger picture. They accused you of being unnecessarily dramatic, when in truth you were being remarkably accurate. They thought you were trying to elevate yourself above them, when you were simply trying to elevate their awareness to a higher plane. And the humiliation hits them even harder because they now see with crystal clarity what you were desperately trying to prevent all along. You weren't trying to impress them. You were trying to prepare them for what was to come. But they were utterly unable to receive the vital message because they chose to reject the messenger. They feel a profound sense of shame because they see you built yourself into an unshakable force without the validation they so readily withheld. They arrogantly assumed that by withholding recognition, approval, or support, they believed their disapproval would clip your wings, never understanding that your flight was powered by something far beyond their control. To them, praise wasn't a gift, but a carefully rationed currency, a tool to manipulate your trajectory. Each ignored achievement, each dismissed idea, each minimized victory was, in their minds, a strategically placed barrier, defining the boundaries of your potential. They operated under the flawed assumption that your success hinged on their acknowledgement, that their validation was the wind beneath your wings. Now, the undeniable truth stares them in the face. They were wrong. You built yourself, brick by painstaking brick, fueled by an inner fire they couldn't extinguish. You didn't wait for their permission, their applause, or their validation. Their endorsement was irrelevant. Your vision, your decisions, your very worth were self-evident. Your unwavering independence served as a stark testament to the futility of their strategies. Their tactics, designed to control, were rendered powerless against someone who measured themselves by the unwavering yardstick of truth, not the fickle whims of external approval. The very weapons they intended to wield against you became a blinding spotlight, illuminating their own profound inadequacy. The bitterest pill for them to swallow is the realization of their own emotional dependency, their reliance on feeling superior, on maintaining a perceived power dynamic. Their silence, their dismissals, their clumsy attempts to rewrite your narrative, all appear utterly foolish in the light of your unwavering growth, a growth that never depended on their patronage. They sought to weaken you by withholding acknowledgement, but in doing so, they only revealed their own vulnerabilities. The insatiable need to control, to dominate, to prop up their fragile self-worth by diminishing yours. You didn't just survive without their approval. You thrived, you blossomed, you soared. And that flourishing is a merciless mirror, reflecting the delicate scaffolding of their ego. Their embarrassment isn't about what you accomplished. It's about their monumental failure to recognize, to nurture, to support. They attempted to exert power over someone who simply didn't need it, withholding support in the naive hope that it would matter. In the end, it was inconsequential. Your independence isn't just a victory. It's a searing revelation of their limitations, a silent declaration that their judgment, their manipulations, Their inflated pride were never the insurmountable barriers they believed them to be. Now, they are left with nothing but the uncomfortable recognition that your ascent was never in their hands, and their shame is the inevitable price for attempting to weaponize validation against someone who was already complete within themselves. Their disbelief wasn't rooted in a rational assessment of your capabilities. It stemmed from a profound lack of imagination, a failure to conceive that someone they knew could possibly carry a destiny of such magnitude. It was never about your potential. It was about the constricting limits of their own worldview. They simply couldn't process the idea that someone they shared history with, someone they grew up with, worked alongside, or casually interacted with could possess a calling that extended beyond the boundaries of their perceived normalcy. Familiarity bred underestimation. They falsely convinced themselves that they understood your full capacity simply because they knew fragments of your past, your upbringing, your mistakes, your vulnerabilities. In their limited minds, someone destined for greatness had to originate from a distant, mysterious, unreachable realm, not from their own backyard, not from their familiar environment, and certainly not from someone they once looked down upon or considered their equal. Their current humiliation arises from the devastating realization that their disbelief was never a reflection of your true identity, but rather a stark exposure of their own narrow, self-imposed limitations. The destiny you carry didn't require their understanding or approval. It simply revealed the smallness of their expectations. They assumed that because they had access to you, your calling must be ordinary, commonplace. They mistook proximity for superiority, believing that familiarity granted them the authority to define your limits. And now, witnessing your extraordinary rise, observing how effortlessly you've embraced a path they couldn't even dream for themselves, they are confronted with a painful truth. They were never qualified to measure you. Your evolution didn't shock you. It confirmed what you always knew in your heart. But for them, it shattered a carefully constructed illusion. They weren't humbled by your success. They were humbled by their own profound blindness. It's excruciatingly embarrassing to realize that what they dismissed as mere ambition was, in fact, an unstoppable destiny. It's painful to acknowledge that the person they casually overlooked was carrying a potential they couldn't even begin to comprehend. Now, they understand that their disbelief wasn't about you being too ordinary. It was about their worldview being woefully inadequate. They were never doubting who you are. They were doubting what was possible, and your meteoric rise has forced them to confront the uncomfortable truth that their limitations were never yours to inherit. They are shocked because you didn't just become who you said you would be. You transformed into someone they never believed could exist, shattering their preconceived notions of what was possible. Your evolution didn't simply confirm your latent potential. It completely rewrote the entire blueprint of what they thought a person like you could become. They expected you to grow, to improve, but only within the confines of their limited imaginations. They envisioned your rise as modest, predictable, and easily manageable. What they utterly failed to prepare for was the very real possibility that you would outgrow even your own early definitions, expanding into a version of yourself that feels almost otherworldly, almost unreal to them. You didn't just fulfill the prophecy. You stretched it beyond the breaking point of their mental capacity. Everything they assumed about your limitations has now been exposed as shallow, superficial. They believed you would improve a little but not undergo a complete metamorphosis. They thought you would gain confidence but not wield authority. They thought you would find clarity but not achieve mastery. They thought you would discover purpose but not embody destiny itself. And this pervasive underestimation wasn't accidental. It was deeply rooted in their own comfort zones. Your perceived smallness made them feel safe, superior, relevant. Now that you've blossomed into someone they never imagined could exist, their humiliation is unavoidable, inescapable. Your growth didn't embarrass them because it was loud or ostentatious. It embarrassed them because it was undeniable, irrefutable. There's no excuse they can cling to, no fabricated story that can explain away your astonishing transformation, no justification for why they didn't believe you when you tried to articulate who you were becoming. Their shame stems from the chilling realization that their disbelief wasn't based on logic or reason. It was based on their own deep-seated insecurities. Your life now serves as a stark exposure of just how low their expectations truly were. They didn't simply misjudge your potential. They misjudged reality itself. You were never evolving to prove them wrong. You were evolving because that's who you were inherently built to be. And now, beholding the fullness of who you've become, they are stunned into silence, forced to confront the fact that the person they underestimated grew into a formidable presence they once deemed impossible. Their shock is, in truth, a form of grief for the version of you they invented, the smaller, dimmer, safer version they needed you to be in order to maintain their own fragile sense of self. But you outgrew their imagination, and now they must grapple with the unassailable truth. You didn't just become who you said you were. You became someone their minds were never equipped to fathom. Their humiliation is the inevitable consequence, the overdue receipt for every dismissive thought they harbored about you, the thoughts they would never dare to utter aloud. Their embarrassment isn't solely derived from your spectacular success. It originates from the secret archive within their own minds, the hidden repository of doubt and underestimation. They are being confronted by thoughts they assumed would remain buried forever. The quiet underestimations, the silent eye rolls, the private judgments they attempted to disguise as concern, the inner smirks that accompanied your aspirations, the casual disbelief they masked behind polite smiles. They never voiced these thoughts openly because, on some level, even they recognized how petty and small-minded they sounded. So, they kept those thoughts tucked away like forgotten trinkets, believing they would never amount to anything, never truly matter. But now, your elevation has transformed those hidden thoughts into a detailed, undeniable receipt, stamped with the unyielding force of reality. Every doubt they ever entertained is now illuminated, not because you deliberately exposed them, but because life itself has a way of shining a light on hidden truths. Success has an uncanny ability to spotlight silence, to amplify the unspoken. Your growth held up a mirror they desperately avoided looking into, revealing just how small they once made you in their limited imaginations. It's not simply your winning that humiliates them. It's the stinging memory of how confidently they misread you, how readily they dismissed your potential. They are replaying all the moments they mentally wrote you off, all the instances they confidently assumed you didn't possess what it takes, all the private satisfaction they derived from thinking you were stuck, trapped in place. They are remembering every envious, insecure, or quietly arrogant thought they ever entertained. And now, those same thoughts feel like damning evidence against them, irrefutable proof of their misjudgment. You didn't embarrass them. Their own limited mindset did. They are finally realizing that their judgment of you wasn't based on truth or objective observation. It was based on how they felt about themselves, their own insecurities and fears. They doubted your abilities because they secretly doubted their own. They dismissed your potential because they felt threatened by it. They hoped you wouldn't rise, because your rise would expose everything they failed to become. Now, they are forced to sit with the profound discomfort of knowing they secretly rooted against someone who was never even competing with them, someone who remained kind, someone who persevered relentlessly, someone who became everything they silently believed you couldn't. Their humiliation is simply the overdue invoice for their own uncharitable thoughts, finally coming due, and it's a bill that only their conscience can truly pay. Conclusion asterisk. The truth is deceptively simple, yet overwhelmingly powerful. You were never misunderstood, misjudged, or underestimated by chance. Every doubt they carried, every whispered criticism, every secret hope for your failure was, in essence, a reflection of their own limitations, their own insecurities, not yours. From the moment you quietly, resolutely claimed your purpose, spoke your truth with unwavering conviction, and moved forward with unwavering clarity, the trajectory was set, the course was irrevocably charted. Every act of patience, every layer of resilience you cultivated, every step you took in alignment with your authentic destiny, has been a living testament to what it truly means to be unstoppable, to be driven by an inner force that transcends external validation. They laughed, they mocked, they doubted, blissfully unaware that your life would one day expose the profound depth of their misconceptions, the inherent fragility of their assumptions, and the blinding nature of their disbelief. What they fundamentally failed to grasp is that your power never required their validation. Your greatness never needed their applause, and your extraordinary journey never depended on their understanding or approval. They wrongly assumed you were small because they were incapable of comprehending the magnitude of potential residing within such close proximity. They believed that distance or lack of support could weaken you, when in reality it only served to sharpen your focus, to solidify your resolve. They mistook patience for passivity, failing to recognize it as a carefully calculated strategy. Every time they underestimated you, they were essentially paying in advance for the inevitable shock of realizing the truth, that the person they casually watched, dismissed, or secretly envied quietly evolved into something far beyond what they could have ever imagined possible. And now, the tables have irrevocably turned. Their humiliation is not your deliberate act. It is the natural and unavoidable consequence of them fundamentally misjudging reality, of projecting their own insecurities and limitations onto someone whose life was never theirs to measure or define. Every whispered doubt, every envious mental comparison, every judgmental thought is now returning as undeniable evidence of their own blindness, their own lack of vision. While you stand unassailable, undeniable, and fully aligned with the person you were always destined to be. You didn't just survive the skeptics and the naysayers. You thrived in spite of them, drawing strength from their negativity. And that undeniable reality serves as a quiet, relentless statement. The world simply cannot contain someone who was inherently built to rise, to overcome, to transcend limitations. So, for every chosen one watching this, own your truth with unwavering conviction. Honor your unique journey with unwavering gratitude, and embrace your inherent power without apology or hesitation. Let your life continue to speak louder than every doubt that has ever been cast against you. Let your actions drown out the voices of disbelief. And to everyone witnessing this extraordinary transformation, don't just passively scroll by. Subscribe to the channel, like this video to show your support, leave a comment with your thoughts and experiences, and share it widely with those who need to hear this message of hope and empowerment. Let the world know, unequivocally, that the rise of the chosen ones is unstoppable, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. God bless you all.